Today, Voices from Oxford is talking to Professor Nick Rawlins. Nick Rawlins wears two hats in the university at the least. One is that he is the Pro-Vice-Chancellor for Development and External Affairs, and in that role travels around the world a lot. And he's also a very distinguished professor of behavioural neuroscience, and we're going to talk to him about both of his interests. So first of all, Nick, the travelling around the world, you've just come back from East Asia, I think.
Yes, I was in Yangon just over 2 weeks ago.
In Myanmar.
In Myanmar, and yes. I was there really as a result of a conversation that, well, actually as a result of a public statement made by Aung San Suu Kyi when she accepted her long-delayed honorary degree,
which she did just not 2 or 3 years ago.
That's right. Yes. And essentially she said, thank you very much, and now I've got something to ask you.
Right.
Can you help me get the University of Yangon back to the international status that once it enjoyed?
Terrific. So the question is the reaching out of Oxford University to another university.
Absolutely.
From a country which until recently has been completely closed to us.
Indeed.
Yes.
So I first went up there in May to go and have a look and try and figure out what sorts of resources there are.
Yes.
And it was quite complicated then to visit the university. I had to have an official letter of invitation from the Ministry of Education. There was quite a lot of organisation, which bits of the university would I be able to see, would I be able to photograph things. In fact, I should say, I was given very good access to everything, but it took a lot of preparation.
Yes.
I next went, having come back with my report on what was there, and with thoughts about the kinds of things we could help provide for them. One, and we're taking this forward, it'll start in March, is a residential training course for senior academic administrators.
Coming here to Oxford.
Coming here to Oxford.
Yes.
To really, until, what's the date today? Is it the 12th?
13.
13.
Yes.
So until 8 days ago, there weren't undergraduates at the University of Yangon, and hadn't been for 25 years.
Really?
1,000 undergraduates arrived on December the 5th. An extraordinary change in what they're trying to do.
Right.
So we're trying to train them on how do you run a modern library?
Yes.
What does a curriculum look like now?
Yes.
How do you look after undergraduate students? How do you assess quality? Sort of across the board.
So they essentially need to catch up, having, as it were, in an almost Rip Van Winkle fashion, been asleep for decades.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes. And now having to catch up with the modern world of higher education.
Indeed. So although they've had graduate students there, they lost the undergraduates, and that's a huge amount of life that's lost from a university.
It's also very interesting that that should be one of the first things that Aung San Suu Kyi said she wanted from Oxford University after being welcomed back here, because she is, after all, an alumnus of the university.
Absolutely.
An alumni, I suppose I should say.
Yes.
And her request was that we should help with their universities.
It was, and in particular with Yangon. And although, of course, her ambitions for the country and her vision for it go far beyond that, I'd like to think that she saw that this was something that we could do and could do really well.
Yes.
And we've done a lot now, in terms of setting things up, and we've actually started some interaction. So it's been thrilling. But the other thing I want to emphasize is the extraordinary rate of change. So as I said, 1,000 undergraduates are now there. I also said it was very difficult for me to get, well, technically,
all the permissions and so on.
Yes, there were technical hoops through which to jump to get permissions. I was back again, as I've said, 2 weeks ago. The university was by now able to invite me on its own account.
Right.
I could bring in people with me who didn't have to.
So things are freeing up, essentially.
Very, very fast indeed.
Yes, right.
In 2002, one of the people who came with me, who is a research fellow at St Antony's, the Aung San Suu Kyi Fellow in Modern Burmese Studies, he wandered onto the Yangon campus and was escorted off at rifle point. When I went in May, there was bamboo scaffolding up around a number of the buildings, but an awful lot of the buildings looked terribly, terribly tired. In November, you could see the difference. So there's a real feeling that it's moving and that we're helping to make it move.
Well, it's great to know that Oxford is playing that kind of role. Perhaps it can play that kind of role in other countries.
Well,
there are
just a matter of capacity, as we say.
capacity too, yes.
And in ways, though, it's a very, very interesting thing for us to undertake.
Yes.
And if someone had said to me 8 or 9 months ago, I might be able to try and do this, I'd said, well, in whose dreams?
Not, yes, right.
But we're finding the resources to do it. We've got research collaborations with the university as well.
Right.
We've been, when I was over there 2 weeks ago, the Dean of the Law Faculty, Professor Timothy Endicott, was giving a lecture on contract law, as it happens. And the law faculty here is really going to help the law faculty there.
Yes, we have a video with Timothy Endicott.
Very
actually,
good. Yeah, well, you will see, I hope, some of what he's had to say.
Let me ask you now, Nick, you've, in addition to being over in Myanmar, you've been in other parts of the East too, haven't you, recently? Yes. Which countries were you visiting?
The countries that I typically go to would be South Korea, Japan, the mainland of China, and Hong Kong, and Singapore.
Right.
And most recently, it will have been, prior to Myanmar, it was the Republic of China, Hong Kong.
Yes, yes. And I've heard also that you've been giving some very interesting lectures out there. And this brings us, of course, to talking a little bit about your own area of behavioural neuroscience, interests, as I understand it, in pain and memory.
Yes.
What got you interested in those kinds of questions?
That's a very, very fair question, and one that it's not completely simple to answer. But I came to Oxford as a psychology and physiology student.
Right.
And my then supervisor, the very estimable professor, as he became, Geoffrey Gray, worked on anxiety.
Right.
And he was someone who liked big pictures in experimental psychology. If we really understood what goes on in the brain of anxious creatures, which might mean rats, or mice, or monkeys, or people, then our chances of intervening are higher. And I started working with him on a structure called the hippocampus, which I
is
advocate.
the area where we think memory, emotion, and so on is...
Exactly. Yes. And in a way, I think we now do believe that memory and emotion rather come together there.
Yes, yes.
And so you can see why someone who worked on emotion was also working on a structure that's important for memory.
Yes.
And then why pain? That's because if you look at patients in chronic pain clinics, it's not the fact that they're always in pain which makes their lives so intolerable. It's the fact that they're also always worried that they're about to be. And if you've ever sprained your ankle and you suddenly realize how differently you walk, how tentatively you put your foot down, if the whole of your life is like that...
So the anxiety is part of what makes the pain difficult to cope with.
Exactly right.
Yes, so is the strategy then best to cope with the anxiety?
And that was exactly the thought.
Yes.
So if you're in a chronic pain clinic, that would be because the treatment of the pain itself hasn't been successful.
Yes.
So my question was, well, is there another target?
Right.
And the essence of the question was this. For many mental activities, if we imagine doing something, we use exactly the same bit of brain that we use when we're really doing it.
Yes.
Otherwise, you'd have to have a double brain. One for the real thing, one for thinking about it, and possibly one for thinking about
exactly
thinking about it.
So, Nick, if I'm right about this, but this is your area of expertise, that's also true if you record, isn't it?
Exactly
in the
right.
brain, that you actually use the same part of the brain, imagining something. Yes.
Exactly.
So it makes sense, that's
right. So my question was, if people are thinking about pain and that's what's making them anxious, and we already know we can't manipulate that bit of brain, have we already lost?
Yes.
Is there nothing else we could do?
Right.
So the interest was, is there actually a separate circuitry that underlies the thinking about it and worrying about it?
Right.
And the short answer is that there is.
Right.
Close, but not identical circuitry.
I see. and therefore you can target that, or what?
Yes.
In what way? With talking, with drugs, or what do you?
I'm very glad you asked that, because the answer is with either, and the other question is, what about with both?
Yes, sure.
So we know that cognitive behaviour therapy can improve the lives of people.
Which is
with
a kind
chronic
of talking
pain,
behaviour,
which is
isn't it?
completely talking therapy.
Yes, yes.
And I know that using classical psychological techniques, I can make the pain from a given temperature of heat on your hand, I can make it feel better.
Yeah.
I mean, I can make it less painful or more painful.
Yes, right.
By manipulating the way you think and what you expect might happen.
Yes.
So it's quite clear that psychology can intervene,
Yeah.
but so also can drugs. Antidepressants can be effective.
So using both is a...
And then the question goes back to a similar question. So if experimental psychology, behavior therapy is working, is there no point in giving drugs as well?
Right.
Or if drugs are working, is there no point in giving psychological treatments? And again, that's the sort of question we seek to answer.
Right.
And in a funny way, the thing I like most about this sort of work is that one can try and, for example, understand the placebo effect. Why don't we get it on our side?
Indeed, we even without receiving something that is actually medication, we feel better.
Exactly.
Yes.
And so those are the sorts of questions that I set out to tackle,
Right.
and that others continue to work on.
Right.
Since my days in the lab are slightly restricted at the moment.
You've opened up those questions.
I think
and
that's
they're
right.
ones, of course, of huge interest. And incidentally, connecting back to the East, meditators, of course, know the phenomenon of finding that pain and anxiety are easier to cope with under certain regimes of meditation.
That's exactly right. And one of the fascinating things that goes on in Oxford is actually a combination of Buddhist meditation methods and cognitive behaviour therapy, which is mindfulness.
Exactly. So this is Mark Williams' work,
This is my colleague and
and
your colleague, Mark
We have
Williams.
a very nice video with Mark Williams in which he explains exactly what he's doing and the rather impressive scientific evidence that it works.
It's for some things, it's the best treatment that there is.
Yes.
So Oxford is extraordinarily lucky. We've got Mark and the Mindfulness Centre.
Yes.
We have David Clark, who works on the cognitive treatment of panic disorder, anxiety, post-traumatic stress disorders. We're a real powerhouse on the psychological side of these things, as well as having the physiologists like yourself, through whom we get to grips with the mechanisms underneath.
Well, thank you very much, Nick, for sharing some of those thoughts with us, both your activities in the wider world and the fascinating story of how we're now helping a university in Myanmar coming out from the cold, if I put it that way, and also extremely fascinating work about the phenomena of pain, emotion, and ways in which we can deal with it. So thank you very much for talking to Voices from Oxford.
You're very welcome. It's a treat to be asked.
Good.